Our big focus tonight, once again, is jobs. Is India facing an acute jobs crisis that the government is not ready to accept, or is the data that is out there just alarmist? The problem is the lack of consistent, credible data put out by the government. Now, the Labour Ministry used to put out quarterly reports, but those have stopped being published for almost a year now. A private agency, the CMIE, has been so far putting out the most comprehensive data on jobs, which says that 1.1 crore jobs were lost in 2018. But the government says there are gaps in the CMIE report, but then doesn't have any data of its own to back this up or to counter what the CMIE is saying. So as the government heading into the general election faces heat on this key issue, Railways Minister Piyush Goyal has now said that his ministry can create 2.5 lakh jobs in the next 2 years. In fact, only a year and a half ago, Mr. Goyal had confidently claimed that his ministry could create 10 lakh jobs in 1 year.
Facing criticism against his government over India's job crisis, Railway Minister Piyush Goyal has promised that his ministry will alone employ nearly 2.5 lakh people in the next 2 years. But this is much less than what Mr. Goyal said a year and a half ago.
पिछले वर्ष हमने शुरू किया था 1.5 लाख के करीब लोगों को नई नौकरी देने का काम। उसके बावजूद आज भी लगभग 1.25 लाख 1,32,000 लोगों की रिक्वायरमेंट रेलवे में है। और इसके अलावा अगले 2 वर्ष का जब आकलन लेते हैं तो लगभग 1 लाख लोग अगले 2 वर्ष में रिटायर होने का अनुमानित आंकड़ा है। तो यानी अंदाजन 2.5 लाख 2.25 से 2.5 लाख लोगों को नई नौकरियां रेलवे अकेले देने जा रहा है।
In October 2017, Mr. Goyal said at the India Economic Summit that the railways could create 10 lakh jobs in 12 months. That means in a span of 14 months, the job creation estimate fell from 10 lakh to 2.5 lakh. We also did a fact check on whether the Railway Ministry has created jobs in the last 9 years. A close look at the data on regular employees in the Ministry of Railways shows that from 2010 to 2014, that is in the UPA 2 years, the total number of sanctioned posts stood at 15.7 lakh, and on an average, the ministry had 2.5 lakh vacancies in those 4 years. But from 2014-15 onwards, when the NDA government took over, the number of posts fell sharply by more than 2 lakh, bringing the total number of sanctioned posts down to 13.3 lakh and the total vacancies falling to 0 in the succeeding 3 years, indicating that the ministry has been able to fill all vacancies, showing a rather rosy job scenario at the Railway Ministry. But the reality is that the total number of sanctioned posts was reduced in 2014-15.
So that just gives you a glimpse into the kind of jobs crisis that we're talking about. But on the other hand, you also have the newly released data of the Employees Provident Fund organization, which says that there's actually been a 48% increase in employment generation in the formal sector, and that more than 7 lakh new jobs were created in November of 2018, which is a 15-month high. Shruti is there with us to tell us more about what that data is telling us. So Shruti, on one hand, we're looking at what you're saying about the number of posts being reduced, thereby, the figures, at least in the Railway Ministry, then looking, rosier. But on the other hand, you are seeing more formal jobs being created as the EPFO data is showing.
Right, Nidhi, as you just pointed out, the latest data does show a 48% rise since September 2017. The latest data shows that 7.3 formal jobs were created. But if you take a closer look at the new enrollments in the new data that has been released, you will see that from between June and November 2018, 69 lakh jobs were created in total in a span of 6 months, which means that on an average, 11 lakh jobs were created every month. But from September 2017 to June 2018, the number of new enrollments, that means the new people who enrolled into EPF saw a fluctuating trend. It increased some months and decreased some months and reached its peak in June 2018, and from then on it started seeing a downward trend, a steady downward trend from 3.8 lakh in June last year to 8.9 lakh in November, which is the latest data that we have. So does this mean that the existing jobs were only formalized and not many jobs are left to be formalized anymore? Or is this an indication, is the total number an indication of jobs are being created? That is a question that we need to ask at this point.
All right, Shruti, thanks very much for that. And we're hoping that our panel can make sense of all of this because, as I said right at the beginning, there's so much data that's actually thrown at us, but nothing that's officially, by the government of India itself. Professor Arun Kumar joining us tonight on the program. Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist with CARE Ratings, is with us. Salman Soos, spokesperson of the Congress. Mr. Deshnath Ratan Nigam, who's a lawyer and political analyst, is with us. And senior economic journalist Pooja Mehra joins us on the program. Mr. Sabnavis, if I could ask you first, let's take a look, for instance, at what the railway minister is saying. A year ago, he's talking about his ministry being able to create 10 lakh jobs in 1 year, and now he's talking about 2.5 lakh jobs by his ministry in 2 years. Is that symptomatic in a sense of tall promises that can't be kept, or are we reading too much into it?
No, I think we're reading a bit too much into it because railways is just one part of the overall segment. Now, let me actually narrate some of the studies which CARE Ratings has done. Like we normally do the employment study on the corporate sector. And what we have seen is that we've seen that employment growth in the last 3 years at least was in the region of around 3 to 4%, which is far lower than what the growth rate in GDP is. Now, historically, we have seen that the two of them go together. So when we used to have an 8% growth in GDP, we also saw employment increasing by around 8%. So quite clearly, the number of jobs being created have been much lower than what it was earlier. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One we should realize is that lots of corporates have actually been trying to cut costs because we've had a case in the last 3 years where overall growth has stagnated in the top line, and in order to protect the bottom line, they have tended to rationalize the overall cost, and the employee cost becomes the easiest one to rationalize. Second, there's been a lot of focus also on technology. So there's been a lot of replacement and redundancy created for labor. And I think that's the most serious issue because today when we are talking in terms of the advent of new technologies into various industries, I think that's going to be a major threat for us going ahead. So jobs are being created. It's not a case of saying there's a crisis, but definitely not to the same kind of numbers. And I think our labor laws are also fairly restrictive because lots of companies would prefer to use technology rather than labor and get into these kind of laws.
But I think the question then is that, again, as I said, are very sort of tall promises being made, and perhaps, you expect politicians to do that. Professor Arun Kumar, of course, the railways is a small part of it, but let me just read out 3 examples which I think should strike at our viewers and really hit home. When the railways had announced a national recruitment drive for menial positions like helpers, porters, cleaners, etc., there were 19 million applicants for 63,000 vacancies. And that was one part. Secondly, in Uttar Pradesh, there were 93,000 candidates, including PhDs and postgraduates, who applied for peon jobs that had an eligibility of class 5, passing class 5. Okay, PhD holders, 93,000 of them for peon jobs. Okay, this has also come out. We did a story the other day that there was some 7,000 people in Maharashtra, in the Maharashtra Secretariat canteen, who applied for 13 waiter jobs in the Maharashtra Secretariat canteen. Most of them college graduates, where again the minimal qualification was having passed class 4. So, Professor Kumar, what does that tell you then about the job situation?
Okay, so we need to distinguish between job creation and work. In India, we don't have social security. So if somebody loses a job, it doesn't mean that they don't work. They create their own work. They may do cart pushing, they may do headload work, they may do some other menial job, right? So what's happening is that in the economy, there's an organized sector and there's an unorganized sector. So 93% are employed in the unorganized sector. Only 7% are employed in the organized sector. It's the organized sector which generates jobs. And the others, there are very few jobs created, or they are part-time jobs or temporary jobs. So we must distinguish between all these things to understand what's going on. So railways or, peons, etc., they are all organized sector jobs, and there are very few of them. So there are a large number of people apply for these jobs. But the point is that in the unorganized sector, it has been damaged very badly because of the demonetization and the GST. So unemployment there has risen, and that's why workers from the urban areas migrated to the rural areas, and the demand for Manrega therefore shot up. The allocation in the budget for 2016-17 was 38,000 crores. They spent 47,000 crores. The next year it was 55,000 crores, and now an additional 6,600 crores being spent. That means workers haven't been able to come back into the unorganized sector in the urban areas in terms of the jobs that they were doing. Now, one of the other things that we need to take into account is that investment is not rising at the rate it should rise. In fact, investment had peaked in 2011-12 at 39%. It has come down to about 32%. And bulk of that decline is in the private sector. So in a sense, if the private sector is not investing as much as it was investing earlier, it would not generate jobs. And the government has been cutting back jobs. So if you look at the organized sector, job creation there is very poor because the public sector is not generating jobs, it's cutting back jobs, and the private sector is inadequate investment, therefore not creating jobs. So everybody is forced to go into the unorganized sector. And that's why the EPFO data should be also analyzed carefully, because EPFO data, what does it show? It shows registration, but not necessarily creation of jobs. Those who are working part-time or on contract in the organized sector, they are getting registered, but that's not the same thing as creation of a new job. So in a sense, the crisis of the economy is that the youth is not finding jobs, as the examples that you gave, which are appropriate to the skills. So there is dignity in any kind of work, but the point is, if you have an MBA and he's only going to sweep the floors of the roads, or if you have a MTech and a BTech who's going to be working as a peon, that's not appropriate to the skill, and there's a lot of frustration in the youth. And that's the frustration
you raised
of the
an
youth
important point,
see.
that how do we then define what a job is? And before I get Salman Soz in on that, I want to ask Pooja about this. Does Professor Arun Kumar actually make a point here then? Because if on one hand the government says, look, this EPFO data shows that we're getting more people employed in the formal sector, but then if these are people who are already sort of on contract, etc., that are now registering in the EPFO, then that's not really a reflection of new jobs. So it actually adds to the chaos on the employment data.
Whether or not there are new jobs, I think what happens is that when you're hired on a contract, and increasingly private sector hiring happens now on contract, nobody prefers to join on a contract relative to, say, getting a railways job, no matter at what level, because you have job security over there. Tomorrow there's slight dip in GDP growth, you know that your job will be on the axe will fall on your job. There's no job security in the private sector with contract hiring anymore, and I think that is what is getting reflected in more and more number of people applying for all kinds of government sector jobs. The way the Indian economy has become structured, people do not want to join the private sector as openly, or in terms of preferences, they prefer government sector jobs.
And that's always been the case.
That's not always been the case. A couple of decades ago, after 1991, things had begun to change because the private sector was paying a lot more. But now people have realized that there's no job security in a private sector job as there is in the government sector job. And I think the second thing I want to build on what he was saying is that what Madan was saying, that in India, companies, I don't think it is technological advancement. I think companies prefer to follow capital intensive production and capital intensive techniques rather than labor intensive techniques. And that tells you two things. One, probably the quality of education and skills is not that good, and therefore the employability in the private sector, where efficiency matters,
is also not matching that.
Exactly, of our youngsters who are there in the job market is not that high. And secondly, for the long-standing issues of our labor laws, which are not getting reformed, the private sector just prefers to build capital-intensive models.
Does, according to you, the EPFO data actually reflect new jobs, the creation of new jobs? Or it's a mix?
I don't think so. It might be a mix, but it needs to be studied more carefully. I haven't spent that much time studying it, but I have my doubts. I don't think this is entirely new jobs.
Well, Mr. Nigam, the point then is that, why make promises politically that they can't keep? If Mr. Goyal is talking about creating 10 lakh jobs in his, again I come to that example because he just spoke on this yesterday, 10 lakh jobs in 1 year, and now he's down to 2.5 lakhs in 2 years. Why make promises that can't be kept?
See, let me first clear certain doubts. In last 70 years, we have not put up a formal system of knowing the number of jobs that are being created, whether it is formal sector or informal sector. So you need to find out from other parameters how many jobs have been created or how many people are employed in the informal sector. Now, EPFO is only applied to companies who have permanent employment of 20 or more employees, not to the contract employees. Let us be very clear. So this clearly shows the new employment. There are no contract employees coming in here.
No, contract employees also included.
No.
I've been a contract employee. I've been on EPFO.
See, then you have to show them as a permanent employee. Please remember.
But your contract is limited for limited fixed period of time.
So, yeah, that's
it's not
what
unlimited. It's not unlimited.
Which you are under EPFO.
Yeah.
No, then you have to show this not as a contract employee, but to get benefits, companies show them as permanent employees. That needs to be tweaked. That data needs to be tweaked. But the fact is there is an increase in it. The fact remains. Then you got to see the Mudra Loans, 13.4 crores Mudra Loans, where a lot of self-employment loans are. These are
But there's a controversy about that also, that the amount of money that people are actually getting loaned is so meager that it's not
I'll tell you how much.
Something that's enough to sustain,
don't interrupt.
a business.
Let me build up my point. See, 90% of them are 50,000. About 50,000 rupees loans where people are trying to put up their own employment, self-employment, roadside employments and things like that. So even if you presume for the sake of argument, you reject 1/3 that they have consumed the money, which is a very high number. If you reject 1/3, it still has created a substantive number of jobs. Third, the commercial vehicles which have been sold about, for a particular period of time, I don't remember how many months, it was about 20 lakhs, which will create 1 + 1 and see the domino effect that would be there. So all these data are not actually available to you. So you need to put in a kind of a system where you come to know the work is going on, huge amount of push in the real estate, in the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, the infrastructure.
What kind of jobs are being created? Now let's talk about the Mudra Loans, because that is important to Mr. Nigam.
See, let us be very clear. I am not talking about the kind of jobs. Those are limited. No government of the day can give the kind of jobs in the formal sector or in the government sector. These are self-employments.
Are they sustainable?
No, earning their livelihood. Some of them would be sustainable. Some maybe there would be, that rate where some of may not continue. But that's a part of any scheme.
I think Pooja has a quick question.
Mr. Nigam, I want to ask you that we have a large number of listed companies that put out all their information on the stock exchanges. Why is that data not showing a big growth in job creation? That is public information. But that, like Madan told us, that is showing less than GDP growth rate increase in number of jobs.
See,
the main source of jobs has to be that for any economy. Our economic model has to be tweaked so that it reflects the labor abundance in the economy.
I understood your question. That is why Piyush Goyal ji said that we need to involve CII into the entire set of exercises to know to what is the actual job creation. A system is being tried to be put in place.
But Madan has given the data, no?
No, that data, you can't correlate. You can't correlate with job creation. So CII's actual
He's
data.
He's talking about job creation data.
Yeah.
He just spoke about
CMI's forte is not looking into labor markets. It is about finance and
it does household surveys.
Household surveys of savings and consumptions and things like that, not about labor surveys.
What seems to be happening here, though, to be very honest, Salman Soz, is that those agencies, there is an Azim Premji University report which isn't so rosy. You've got a graphic on that which is shown a decline in jobs actually from the UPA time continuing right up to the NDA time. There is the CMI report. There is what Madan Sabnavis is talking about from CARE ratings. But the government believes that all these reports, have gaps, that there's a problem with these numbers. And yet it stopped the Labour Bureau's surveys. There is a report that it has withheld on unemployment data, which, the media has put out in the last few weeks. So until people know from the government itself, I think there's going to be all these questions that will be raised.
Well, Nidhi, you're right. You started with Mr. Piyush Goyal's kind of announcement. Late last year, in the Parliament, they collated data and said that there are 24 lakh government jobs at the central and the state government levels that are unfilled. 24 lakh. 10 lakh of those are in the education sector. 5.5 lakh jobs are in the police department. And so many important jobs remain unfilled. That's just the government sector. Now, Mr. Goyal, after 5 years, is going to suddenly now create 2.5 lakh jobs in the next 2 years in railways. I think this is laughable, frankly. I think the government's response typically has been that we should disbelieve everything that anybody else says about jobs. There is no crisis. They'll talk about the Mudra Loans, which are basically not going to be able to create jobs because they're very small amounts. They're going to talk about pakoda economics. They're going to basically say that CMI is wrong. They're going to say that CARE is wrong. They're going to say that Azim Premji is wrong, the university. They're going to say that everybody else is wrong. There are gaps. But they will not try to fill the gaps themselves. They'll withhold the Labour Department surveys because they don't want bad news to get out. And by the way, the news is actually going to get much worse. And let me explain. Right now, the labour force participation rate for women is about 27%. In China, it is 61%. Imagine when women start getting into the labour force like men do. Male labour force participation rate is 80% in India. When women start coming into the labour force as men do, or even at 50%, for example, or 60%, then you'll see what a crisis looks like. Add to that technological change and what that is going to do to jobs in the middle. Not just, forget low skilled, forget high skilled. Jobs in the middle. Then you'll have a real crisis. I think the biggest thing we can do, frankly, not just, this government, previous governments, but, this government in particular, I think our government structure is such that we inhibit economic activity. We inhibit job creation. And I think it is time for us to say that the government cannot really create jobs, let the private sector create jobs, unleash the creativity of Indians, unleash the creativity of 1.3 billion people, and let them create jobs. I think that's the only way. I don't think the government is going to. The government is actually in the way.
The government won't be the job creator.
Demonetization. The government is actually inhibiting.
Okay, Mr. Nigam.
See, there are two chief ministers, one from West Bengal and one from Kerala. Despite all these gloomy scenarios, they have claimed, and for the sake of argument, I am going to believe them. The West Bengal said about 57 lakhs jobs that they have created in a year, and Kerala government said 63 lakhs. Going by their own rate, these are the jobs the state governments are also creating. So overall scenario is all mixed up.
But you believe them?
No, I am saying for the sake of argument, I am believing them. For the sake of the argument, I am believing them, and somewhere down the line, if you reject even 1/3 of them, they are also creating jobs.
Okay, Professor Arun Kumar.
Yeah, regarding the Mudra loans, I think we have to be very clear that the amount of loan given divided by the number of loans that the people have got, the average is 50,000 over 3 years. That means you have an average of about 17,000 per year. Now, look at the micro units where these loans should go, because the micro units are with a capital of up to 25 lakh. On an average, they have a capital of 2.5 lakh, and the average employment is only 1.7. So if you give an annual loan of only 17,000, that's not going to create a job. So therefore, the number of jobs created by Mudra loan is going to be very few. It's not going to be of the order of the number of, or even 1/3 of the loans given. So Mudra loans must be looked at carefully. The second point is that it's being said that now because there are so many vehicles have been bought, or that the taxi aggregators have purchased vehicles. But the question is, what is the net employment? Because a lot of employment is lost in the regular taxis, etc., the private chauffeurs, etc., that were there. Similarly, it is said that now, for instance, we have the e-commerce and there are delivery boys, etc. But then the point is, how many mom and pop stores are losing jobs? So we have to look at the net job creation, and that's where the figures are not very good. The net job creation is down, and that's why the Manrega demand is very high. So I think we have to look at it in a proper perspective.
That's right.
So, Matan Sabnavis, what's your prediction? We had Mahesh Vyas on this program just a couple of weeks ago. When the government and Piyush Goyal and Prakash Javadekar in particular were sort of directly attacking the CMIE's data, his data. But he actually predicts that things are going to be pretty tough on the job front in the next couple of years as well, in the next year also. Is that how you see it too?
No, I think the pace of growth of employment is definitely going to be slow. I think this 3 to 4% which we're talking of is something which is going to remain for some time until we're able to get a real GDP growth in the region of 8 to 9%. Because even today, when we get these number of 7.4% in GDP, I think it's more of a statistical number, and we don't really see that kind of growth taking place around us across any of the sectors which we're talking of. Now, one important way of looking at employment, I've been hearing this particular discussion and different views being put. If we are actually creating such kind of jobs and people are earning higher incomes, they must either be spending it or they must be saving it. And we are definitely not seeing either of these two things happening. Yeah. We're not seeing the savings rate going up. We're not seeing consumption increasing to any perceptible level. And most of the consumer-oriented industries are still struggling at the base level, which means that I don't think these kind of jobs which we are talking of, irrespective of whether it's the EPFO or the railways, I don't think it's leading to consumption, which means that's really the clue that we're not creating enough jobs. And also we should remember that if you just look at the central government, look at the state government budgets, central government budget, public sector units, if you actually see that the total amount of employment in these entities have actually been coming down, which means even the government actually has been going slow in terms of recruitment. It's more at the higher levels, at the lower levels, they're actually laying down staff. Means people who are retiring are not really being replaced at the clerical or the peon level.
No, so Salman Soz, if people were to ask the Congress, what is your plan then? I mean, you've told us everything that's wrong with the Modi government's handling of the economy, but then what is your plan to generate jobs? I mean, is there a plan apart from saying we'll generate them?
Okay, there are two things, Nidhi. One, of course, our manifesto process is going on and the plan is coming. But let me tell you some broad outline, which I think people would agree with, generally speaking. Beyond demonetization, GST has actually had a very kind of chilling effect on business activity. We must simplify GST. I think a single rate, a single low rate, and a 0% rate for merit goods would really help businesses. I think businesses are really tired of this tax. This tax is really a bad tax. We must reform it. That's one. Second, I think we really need to get tax terrorism in control in this country. I think people are sick and tired, whether you're a trader, whether you're a small or medium enterprise. All this Inspector Raj is really killing business activity. If you don't let people do their work, they will not create jobs. They will not invest. There's a reason investment in this country is down. There's a reason, by the way, if people are getting these formal sector jobs, as Mr. Nigam says or as the BJP claims, by the way, EPFO data is very volatile. It is not to be trusted right now, frankly.
No, it is volatile, which is what we pointed out.
Indeed, creating these kinds of... Yes, if they are indeed creating these jobs, then they should be saving and there should be higher investment. It is not happening right now. There should be consumption. That is not happening right now. I think what the government of India, no matter what party controls the next government, we as a people have to decide, is the government going to come in the way of the private sector? Because the private sector is the only a real area where you can create.
So you're saying it's until private sector, and that's the point you made earlier as well. Get investments going. Mr. Nigam, and then I'll give the last word to Pooja. Mr. Nigam.
See, one of the biggest criticism of this government by the opponent is that it's not the export growth, it's a consumption-based economic growth. There where Mr. Soz gets, in difficulty. Secondly, I agree that there were short-term dislocations in demonetization. And there was GST, there is a gestation period of about 3 years, it's settling down. So that the things are improving. And if you also recall, the government also launched a 1 crore loan scheme to be approved within 14 hours for SMEs about a month back. So that process has been to stabilize the MSMEs. Suddenly when you become the fastest growing economy, you are going to become the 5th largest economy. These are not empty claims, these are by world agencies. And ease of doing business, what he was talking about, this phenomenal jump in ease of doing business in India by the international rating. So all those things point in the correct direction. I agree, lot has been done, lot is being done, and lot has to be done.
But okay, that's an interesting point, and I'd like to end with that.
Yeah, what I'd like to say,
how do we square off the GDP data then with whatever we're hearing about jobs and investment?
So like Madan Sabnavis's data is showing that job creation is not keeping pace with even this GDP data that we are getting, GDP growth that we are getting, and we definitely need faster than what we are getting right now. But the point is, what disappoints me is that neither the Congress nor the government in office right now is recognizing that the main thing holding back jobs creation in the private sector is the labor laws. Nobody wants to address the labor laws. There's a study by Professor Panagria that showed in 2013 that there are at least 200 to 300 labor-related regulations, some of which have survived in this country for more than 4 to 5 decades, where labor inspectors can come and even if they like ask factories, where a water dispenser has been placed, where a matka has been placed, and things like that. You cannot fire people without permissions, without taking permissions from the labor department. And unless these set of regulations is addressed, and until the time industry begins to look at labor as a factor of production and not a head of expenditure, things are not going to change.
Right.
And lastly, in 2014, just before the election results had come out, the then CII president had in an interview told me that any industry, CII studies had shown that any industry would rather spend 5 lakh rupees on deploying capital rather than hiring one, creating one job, hiring one person. That is how disincentivized Indian industry is to, to hire labor. And nothing has been done to address that.
Well, I think lots more conversations will be had on this, because this is clearly going to be a key election issue for a lot of people out there. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us on that tonight.